Thank you very much, Les. First of all, could I congratulate you on your recent appointment. Obviously, our paths have crossed in different fields, with particular reference to social security. But I would want to thank the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission for undertaking this inquiry into accident and emergency provisions in hospitals in Northern Ireland, a service which impacts on every family and person through the whole area, and affording this opportunity to me to make a short presentation on behalf of the population in South Down, but I also come as a consumer of accident and emergency in Downpatrick. I have used both the old hospital and the new hospital in terms of A&E provision. I very much welcome the terms of reference that have been identified by the Commission as relevant to this inquiry: dignity, participation and information, and I hope that I will address these areas. It is my hope that the Commission will leave this evidence session with a comprehensive understanding, empathy with the local population's health needs, and acceptance that if these themes are to be achieved and dignity, participation and information be brought back to the centre of our health service and A&E provision, then we must have nothing less than the restoration of 24-hour consultant-led A&E service at the Down and the enhancement of our inpatient services. And I suppose that's where I and the community vary with the Trust. It is important that the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission undertake such an inquiry, particularly in a period when health service budgets are under the microscope, and at a time when many of us have known for a long period of time that there has been a mismanagement of the health service budget and a lack of proper resource planning at the centre. And I talk about the department in this particular instance, which seem to focus more on administration and therefore the staff that flowed from that, rather than on the patients and on health service delivery for every man, woman and child throughout Northern Ireland. This constituency can be characterised as an area where the public sector economy is important in terms of employment and service to the wider community. And for years, a significant proportion of that public service was provided by the hospital services here in Downpatrick. And central to the debate about hospital services has been the principle local accessibility at the point of delivery. And everybody in that debate recognised that principle. I include my predecessor, the Down District Council, the Down Community Health Committee, the then Down Lisburn Trust, the Minister and the Department of Health at various times. So on that basis, through political representation and community determination and dedication, we achieved a new hospital with a range of A&E services. And the decision to provide that new hospital in Downpatrick with a range of services for the people of Down and Mourne was made by the then Minister for Health, Des Brown, who acknowledged that need for the principle of local accessibility to health services to be honoured. However, those health services have been subject to change over the last number of years, and pressure has grown on the availability of middle-grade doctors within the South Eastern Trust and further afield. The ability to access a consultant-led accident and emergency service has dramatically reduced and changed to an evening and weekend service provided by the out-of-hours team with nurse practitioners, albeit in the evenings on a temporary basis. Many patients who are classified on an emergency basis now find themselves and their lives being placed at some risk, and that's their perception, as they are brought some 23 miles in ambulances to the Ulster Hospital in Dundonald. And you've just heard Ursula give witness to the situation of her father-in-law, where they can lie for many hours on trolleys because of the pressures that already exist in the Ulster Hospital and in the Belfast hospitals. And indeed, I brought such a case quite recently to the Patient and Client Council to highlight the case on behalf of patients. And I believe if patients could be treated fully at the Down, rather than having to travel to Belfast, then their health and well-being could be better protected and not to be placed at the same level of risk and danger. And undoubtedly, members of the panel, all of that places a certain level of stress on the patients and also their families. And added to this, I feel that the Trust is further reducing the dignity of individual patients by ensuring that they are unable to obtain beds in the Down Hospital due to the seasonal closure of some beds over the summer period. And I presume that is an issue to do with competing budgets and the need to address budgets. The Trust has told me that they've been implementing this partial closure seasonal policy over the last few years, which has resulted in unending delays in some patients accessing beds. In fact, I have been told stories that patients following surgery in the Belfast-based hospitals have been unable to return to the Down for recuperation for some days due to that unavailability of beds. And I was told last week that there was about 3 to 4 people in the waiting list. One man here from Downpatrick, about 85 years of age, who had a hip replacement in a Belfast hospital and was anxious to return home where he could be in the comfort and love of his own family. Eventually did get that, which I was particularly grateful for. But I do believe, had the same number of beds been made available throughout the year period, then this situation would not have arisen. And in early July this year, the Down Hospital, that has 49 beds, was operating with 25% less of those beds than it should have been. And at the same time, there's also considerable pressure on bed supply in the Belfast hospitals, all placing pressure on an already overstretched health and medical service. And we have seen examples of that on our TV screens, on radio bulletins, evidence that has been given to the Health Committee in the Assembly. And as a consequence, the health of many individuals, in my humble opinion, is being placed at considerable risk and their dignity reduced. Constituents who are patients, consumers like myself, are being told that. And I do believe it would be preferable if the Northern Ireland Executive, the Minister for Health, the South Eastern Trust and the Commissioning Board invested their time and resources, both financial and doctors, into ensuring that patients could be adequately treated in the new Down Hospital, thereby fulfilling the human rights principles of equity, equality and accessibility to a range of health services at the point of delivery. And I know that references were made by the Trust to the College of Emergency Medicine. I do know that the College of Emergency Medicine, who covers both the UK and Ireland, had undertaken a trial for middle grade doctors, and that was to happen last month. But I understand that those doctors were meant for employment or deployment in Britain. We want to know when there will be a recruitment to help the Trust, help the commissioning body and help the Department for Northern Ireland so that patients are put back at the centre of service delivery. And alongside this is the need for...
Maybe one more minute. Just
1 more minute. I believe, and then you can ask me, you're going to ask me some questions, that there is a need to put the principles of local accessibility at the point of delivery, to put patient service, to put equity and to put equality of access. Because we believe that we as a community are entitled to the same level of access to services as our neighbours in the Belfast and Derry conurbations, because that's what the accessibility was about, it was what local accessibility was about, and it was also one of the reasons why that new hospital was situated here in Downpatrick, to accommodate the needs of a rural population which covers Down and Mourne, right down south of Annalong and, in fact, north probably of Saintfield. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have 3 questions. I think you came sort of halfway through the some of the evidence of the Trust, but I think their evidence is clearly evidence you'll be very familiar with, which was that the issue that led to the closure of the Trust was predominantly the difficulty in recruiting middle grade emergency department staff. And we've heard in Belfast certainly that that's an issue not confined to this area. It's clearly an issue and a problem in in Belfast. I suppose my first question is, what do you think are the short and long-term solutions to ensuring there's sufficient recruitment of key A&E staff?
Well, I'm fully conscious, and I've talked to Mr Mackay and his staff. I've also talked to the Minister and the Commissioning Board about this issue. I have also talked to Dr Clive Mann, who's the Professor of Emergency Medicine, who chairs that in London, and I do believe there's a need to exert influence upon them to carry out that trawl for the recruitment of middle grade doctors in Northern Ireland, and to have a special dedicated recruitment drive for this year, for next year and the following year. I think we also need to ensure that we can recruit as much as possible right throughout the island. I'm well aware of the feminisation issue and the fact that many young doctors, after their F1 and F2 years, go off to Australia to gain further experience, but also they feel there's not maybe the depth of experience, or they want new challenges. But having said that, I believe there's the need for that recruitment to be, shall we say, accelerated for Northern Ireland. I think that the Minister must give focus to this as a matter of priority, and the patient must be put back at that centre of focus. And there is also, I am led to believe, and I've talked to people who are, and I understand there could be issues about bypassing recruitment or bypassing procurement, so I would caution about this, but there are independent consultants who say, and I have talked to them, who would be quite happy to assist the Trust and the Department in undertaking such procurement of doctors in Eastern European countries, albeit these doctors would not be ready perhaps for a number of months, because there would be language issues and there would be also training issues. But I think all of those matters should be adequately explored so that it is possible to recruit those doctors. And I do recall that the Trust sent me a bulletin, and they send me a bulletin every couple of months, where they indicated that they have been able, as part of the June recruitment, to obtain the services of 2 new doctors, middle grade doctors. But it didn't say if they were for the Down or which hospital they were for. And I think we need better specification, shall we say, in that respect.
And can I ask you a quick supplementary on that? Have you any ideas? I mean, they've clearly attempted recruitment in the past, and it's not worked at sufficient scale. And again, that doesn't seem to be a problem that's unique to this area. Have you any thoughts on what other things they could do, what other incentives there might be that would attract people to come to work within the South East Trust, or what ideas or what you think trusts should do to try and change, if you like, the pattern of recruitment?
Well, I suppose those are incentives to doctors. You're talking about incentives to live within this particular area. And I only have to say, in that respect, Les, you only have to look around at the beauty of the area, a high quality of the education for their potential children, and the high quality of the recreational amenity. So those, to me, are attractions if they are family-based doctors, or there are people that are seeking to make their lives here. But I think there has to be a focus placed on the College of Emergency Medicine in London to ensure that they put that accelerated drive for Northern Ireland, because I can tell you that I and my constituents are sick, sore and tired of hearing the Minister talk about difficulties about budgets, and where does the patient focus in any of that.
Okay. And my second question, and it'll be my final question, I think, on the Down Hospital issue, and Down and Lagan Valley in particular. But from your experience, what do you think has been the impact of the closure of the emergency department in the evenings and weekends, both here, maybe less cited on Lagan Valley, but what's your view has been the effect of that in terms of care within emergency departments?
Well, I suppose from a very human level, people were very afraid when that decision was taken in the mouth of Christmas last year. They had this fear that they would be put in an ambulance or would have to travel by car to go to Dundonald That's a distance of some 23 miles. The road infrastructure is not that particularly great between here and Dundonald. It's a bit undulating, a bit narrow, and to be sitting in the back of an ambulance can probably disturb your illness, maybe accelerate your illness, so that they had those particular fears. They thought that the fact that they would have to make that added journey to Dundonald would place themselves at risk and place their health and well-being at risk. That is what constituents told me. And I've heard in the last 10 minutes the Trust mentioned the political will. I don't disagree with that. There has to be a political will to invest resources. But was it a lack of political will that resulted in no beds for that gentleman called John Jess in the Down Hospital? I think there needs to be a better management of those resources. I come back to your point. People have had to go to Dundonald. Some, of course, have been treated by the GPs in the out of hours, who run, I would say, a very good service along with their administration team. But people need the security of consultant-led A&E. And can I tell you why? For the very simple reason that they feel that that will provide a sustainability of a service. Because running alongside that, we want to see the Trust having the capacity, having the will, and being driven by a political determination by the Minister to put new services into the Down Hospital. And I'll support them in whatever way possible, but as long as we get those services that provides that sustainability into perpetuity for the hospital.
Okay, I'm going to now move, and I've one final question, and I'll then pass it to Marion and Paul. Kind of move a little bit away from the issue of emergency department in Downpatrick. You'd heard the evidence from the Trust, and I think it was towards the end of their evidence, about what they're doing to ensure involvement of everybody from their staff, their clinicians and their users in services and participation. And I wonder if you'd tell us, as the local MP and obviously somebody who gets around your constituency, what your experience of, if you like, particularly on the side of the users and participation of the Trust, and if there are any issues, what improvements you might suggest if that's appropriate.
Well, you mean the interaction between the Trust
I think in terms of the idea of, yes, that services are planned and discussed and people feel involved in decision-making in the local area. And I'm talking now in much broader terms than just the emergency department.
Well, perhaps if I could explain at the outset, the constituency of South Down is serviced by two trusts. The northern end, which is roughly the bit that's in Down District Council, is serviced by the South Eastern Trust. The southern end of constituency, which includes part of Banbridge and part of Newry-and-Mourne, is the Southern Health and Social Services Trust. And if I would have to say that I have always, on a personal level, had fairly regular meetings with the Trust. Doesn't mean I always like the answers that I receive, and they will know only too well that if I don't get the answers I receive, I'll go back to them, because I believe that it's all about patient delivery and improving the service for people. In terms of communication to the public, annual meetings are held, or not annual, monthly meetings are held of the Trust Board. They're totally accessible to the public, and as Mr McCahey pointed out, there is a patient experience given at each one of those. So that is useful in that respect. But I think that the Trust has to remember that it's not all about process, that it's not all about some inanimate object, that it's about the delivery of service for people, and it's people and patients and their illnesses that have to be dealt with. And if I could give you an example where I'm talking about the principle of local accessibility, one constituent here in Downpatrick contacted me. He has an ENT problem, and he was told, and this man's now in his 80s, he's a man that gave a lot to public service in this town and further afield, and he was told he would have to go for his procedure to Ballykelly in County Derry. Now that is a considerable distance to the west of Northern Ireland, but also somewhere that if you didn't have access to a car, there is no public transport direct. you would have to get maybe 2 or 3 buses to do that. So that is a sort of an issue that I think in terms, it's the delivery of service that I am more concerned about, and to ensure that the public know what is aware of it. And I do know that as a result of my meetings with Mr Mackay, that following the decision to temporarily close consultant-led A&E at night time, they did publish a leaflet following their discussions with the Down Community Health Committee, myself and others, that explained in some detail what was available. Now, I didn't like the notice that was put at all the entry points to the various towns, which said what wasn't available. And I welcomed the fact that that was changed to say what was available, because people want to know what is available, what is accessible to them. I still have my bottom line, as does the public. And could I say that the other area that concerned me in terms of, I suppose, interaction with the public, we have had a very good midwifery-led unit here, which I welcomed very much, but the nature of that service, it slightly changed, and there was no consultation about the change of that service, because it was more in an anticipation of the commissioning body, the Health and Social Care Board, having a financial staffing concern. I think they have to always remember that whilst they have budgets to meet, that whilst they face financial challenges, and I'm one of the first to recognise that there are patients here, all of us are patients, including the Trust Board staff, that expect a certain delivery. And the one thing we do not want to face is travel to another hospital that can add stress, add turmoil and trauma to us.
Okay, and before I pass you over, just to drill deeper in a very brief answer, do you notice a discernible difference between the two trusts that are within your constituents in terms of the participation? Or would you say that, frankly, their schemes for involving, from an elected member right down to the public, are very similar? I mean,
I can only speak, Les, from my own perspective in that respect.
Sure.
And I would say they're similar.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's fine. I'll pass you then to Marion.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ritchie.
Thank you.
Could I ask you, from your constituency, Postbank, and from your surgery, are you picking up any other health-related issues in relation to A&E outside the restricted A&E opening hours in the Down?
I would pick up issues, of course, that's the primary issue, but associated with that primary issue is the need to access those services. They need to be helped, they need to be treated, and in the main, it's about those particular issues. I do get issues that impact not on the Trust, but also on the Northern Ireland Ambulance Service, and about the fact that in terms of collection points for the Belfast hospitals, the people who normally would have been treated in the Down Hospital have had to wait to the end of the line. And I can think of one particular lady who had to lie in in one of those sort of ambulances and was a double amputee. And I did feel particularly for that lady.
And are you aware of any work that was done to improve the number of ambulances available to deal with the...
Well, I think that is a particular issue, that the Ambulance Trust is also facing financial challenges, and because of the, shall we say, South Down, in the part that's in the South Eastern Trust, has different types of topography. You're sitting in the lowland, but you also they have patients coming from the uplands in the Mournes, in the northern part of the Mournes, so to speak. So it is difficult with those topographical challenges to get to a particular point with an ambulance. And I've known ambulances having to come from Newry to Downpatrick to pick up patients to bring them to the Ulster. So that delay in waiting for that ambulance then with the added journey can place that stress on the patient, add maybe to their illness, and also place stress on their families.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you very much for
Thank you.
helping us. We appreciate it. Am I right in thinking that you're broadly in favour of a human rights-based approach to health?
Yes, and maybe if I could explain, because my interpretation of that is, I can well recall that the United Nations made their declaration back in January 2008. My understanding of a human rights approach might be slightly different to yours, but I thought it included the principles of equity, equality, and tackling discrimination. So I favour that approach.
Well, in that case, I'd really appreciate your suggestions on what you think can be done to raise the profile of a human rights-based approach to health. What can be done to ensure a human rights-based approach to health, including in relation to emergency care, can have sort of greater currency, because there's resistance to it in some quarters. So do you have any suggestions, given your long experience and you're broadly in favour of a human rights-based approach, which certainly includes equity, equality and non-discrimination? Do you have any advice on what can be done to better embed this approach? What might be done in Westminster, perhaps? Right. Here in Belfast, in trusts, in clinics, in particular departments, in hospitals. Do you have any thoughts or guidance on how this challenging endeavour can be promoted?
Well, Professor, that is a very interesting question. And notwithstanding the funding challenges that the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission already face, and I, in fact, made representations about those particular issues, because you cannot carry out your work unless you have the funding to execute your job. But the very first thing is the fact that the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission recognised and acknowledged that there was an issue about accessibility to emergency medicine demonstrated for me that you took this, the Human Rights Commission took this seriously, that you saw that there was a need to put a rights-based approach in terms of accessibility to health, medical and social care provision. So that's number one. Number two, I believe there has to be, like the Trust, a political will, but I believe that shall we say, in the Department of Health in London and the Department of Health in Belfast needs to put a human rights-based approach, and that, to me, is about the needs of the patients first and foremost. And I do know that in Northern Ireland, health represents a significant proportion of the budget. When you consider there are 12 departments, 46% of the budget. But notwithstanding that, I think that government policies have to be imbued with that human rights approach. I think there needs to be a little analysis of that to see if that is the case. If not, is how you go about correcting that. And finally, I suppose what I would like to see yourselves doing is recommending to the Northern Ireland Executive and to the Minister that there needs to be and I'm nearly afraid to mention any more reviews, because that means more paralysis by analysis, and that's the last thing we want. I want to see things centred on the patient, and I believe that is the best human rights approach, and to ensure that a patient can access those services and that that same equality of access, whether you live in an urban area or a rural area.
Thank you very much for your time and help.
I'm going to ask you just one final question. It's in the spirit of equity that you've mentioned a couple of times, and the Trust were very keen to be asked the question about if there were two things that you would like to see done differently around the question of in emergency departments, what would they be?
Well, whilst I use an emergency department, Les, I wouldn't have full knowledge of them, but from a political point of view, I want to see the recruitment of middle-grade doctors directly into the Down Hospital to provide that 24 consultant-led emergency service in the Down Hospital, accompanied by a suite of services given to the Trust that they can implement for the people of the Down and Mourne area, because to me the patient is first. And I also, in that respect, would like to see trust becoming, along with the Health and Social Care Board, in their negotiations with the Minister, to become more of a lobbying body on behalf of patients and not simply accountants for the commissioning body.
Okay, thank you. Can I thank you very much for attending today, offer you the same opportunity that we've said to all witnesses. If there is anything you want to add or provide us with a written submission, we would be delighted to take that as well. And just to thank you for attending today. It's been really useful for us to hear from you as an elected representative alongside the trust and patients. Thank you very much indeed.
And could I thank you for your consideration, and thank you for affording me this opportunity on behalf of the community of South Down. And thank you for being here.